Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Alex Krainer to the program. An author, market analyst, researcher, trader, hedge fund manager, and the creator of iSystem Trend Following. We're going to dive into the dystopian digital prison that seems to be forming around us as the UK and Australia implement the most draconian internet laws ever rolled out by a so-called democratic country. How long will it be until this starts to spread globally, and what does it mean for free speech online? We're going to discuss why Alex thinks the EU has suffered massive self-inflicted disasters that are causing it to sink like the Titanic. Is this a controlled demolition, or are the EU leaders really just this stupid? We're also going to break down both the Russia-Ukraine and the Israel-Palestine conflicts and get Alex's thoughts on where both wars are headed and more. Commodity Culture has merch. Click the link in the description below. Everything backed by a 100% quality guarantee. And now, my friends, strap yourselves in for my conversation with Alex Krainer. Alex Krainer, great to have you back on the program. I want to kick things off with a very concerning trend that is starting to emerge globally, and that is the concept of a digital prison in terms of the internet being restricted. And we have seen recently two so-called democratic countries in the form of Australia and the UK that have passed some of the most draconian internet laws ever implemented by a so-called Western democracy. Australia banning people under, I believe it's the age of 16 from accessing social media. And so that is a pretense for everybody needs to show their ID to show that they're above a certain age. The UK also requiring age verification for certain sites, once again, requiring facial scans, requiring government ID. And just in case America, the so-called bastion of freedom, thinks it's gotten away here, the YouTube in the US specifically is now rolling out AI to determine if users are 18 or under. And if the system flags you as under 18 and you're trying to watch restricted content, you have to produce a government ID. So it's happening to some extent in the US as well. I mean, a lot of people have been warning that this type of system is coming, and it appears to be in full fruition right in front of us. Do you think this is going to spread globally at this point? And do you think people are just going to submit at this point? I mean, countries like Australia had some of the most draconian COVID laws in the world, so it kind of makes sense that they could then go down that path. I'm wondering your thoughts on the potential implications of this globally and if you see it spreading.
I don't think it's going to be spreading globally, at least not in an even-handed manner. You know, the thing that Great Britain and Australia have in common is that they're both ultimately under the rule of the crown. Nominally they're democracies, but then Britain is like supposedly constitutional monarchy, only without a constitution. And Australia is supposedly a democracy, but under a British appointed governor general, right? Who has veto power over the Australian government and its prime minister, and who is responsible and accountable to the British king. And so we've already seen during the COVID pandemic that the most draconian regimes were exactly instituted and maintained by the countries that are essentially British dependencies. So Australia, Great Britain, Canada, and New Zealand. Of course, this is so far as nations go, but then you have also the big tech, which is, some of it is leaning towards the globalism, towards the globalists, because we have to always keep in mind what we're experiencing is ultimately the clash between two systems of governance, or at least that's how they describe it themselves. Only it's not exactly two systems of governance, it is one system of governance against everybody else. And that one system of governance is Western-centric, neo-colonialist, imperialistic system of governance, which still holds its headquarters strategically, philosophically, in the City of London. So City of London is the mortar, and so it's not surprising that the most draconian measures of control over the population are being rolled out exactly in the UK. And it's been that way for a long time, and I've had, experience with this stretching back to 2017, because when I published a book about, well, the book is essentially covers the issue of relations between Russia and the West. The book got banned after about 6 weeks on the market, and then I reissued it with a proper publisher who combed through everything to make sure there's nothing that they could be sued over, to make sure that everything is sourced and correct. And then the book got banned again after 5 weeks. So it kind of goes along that statement by Frank Zappa, that the freedom in the free world is illusory, and that the illusion will carry on for as long as it is profitable for the ruling establishment to maintain the illusion. And once the illusion is no longer necessary, they're gonna remove the props and put away the tables, and you're gonna find yourself staring at a brick wall. And I think that this is exactly what we're looking at. I think that European Union is clearly in the clutches of the globalists, but I think that the EU is kind of coming apart at the seams, and they have to be very careful about how far they want to antagonize their populations. So I think that if you tried to bring this into France, there would be a reaction. If you tried to bring it to some of the Eastern European nations like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Croatia, there would be a strong reaction against it. So I think that they're going to think twice. In Britain, you have the advantage that you had this continuity of rule for so long that many people, even if they have grievances, they don't really question that government that much, and they don't. I think that they don't think beyond electing the Conservatives and then voting for Labour. And then if they don't like Labour, well, we're going to vote the Conservatives. And then they, when that no longer works, then they give them like Reform UK. They bring up Nigel Farage, but Nigel Farage is, a different flavor of the same ruling establishment. So I think that they can afford to be more draconian. I think that they have a much more firm hold on power, whereas the European governments might be in that situation individually, but the EU, the European Union under European Commission and the unelected commissioners, like from President Ursula von der Leyen on down, they don't have the legitimacy, and they're widely perceived to be illegitimate. So I'm not sure how this is going to go down, but in the United States, you might get big tech coming on board, namely Google, right? But I don't think it's going to be uniform. I don't think it's going to be maybe under the Biden administration, it would have been much easier. But with Trump, Google can do this, but all it's going to do is it's going to accelerate the move away from Google's services towards alternative, because there are going to be alternatives. There already are alternatives. Google is extraordinarily powerful, but that doesn't mean that it's unassailable. And we can see that. And I don't necessarily credit Elon Musk himself, but he must have some political backing, and whatever that political backing is, they've decided to go the alternative route. So I think that still the United States might end up being a bastion of freedom and democracy for the Western world, even if it's been weakened, even if it's been compromised, but there are still people, organizations, political groupings that take their whole constitution seriously, that take the question of liberty seriously, and that are absolutely not on board with the globalist system of governance, and who want a different world for themselves and their future generations.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Well, I want to pull on that thread regarding the EU because you recently wrote an article on Substack called EU Finally Struck the Iceberg. Here's a quote. When you tweeted about it, you wrote, "The EU suffered 3 high-stakes disasters in the space of a month, all of them self-inflicted. This will likely be the beginning of the end for the bloc." Outline what these 3 disasters are, and do you think these self-inflicted disasters could be a form of controlled demolition by the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, or are the EU leadership really just this stupid?
My money would be on them being exactly that stupid, and maybe more. So the three disasters. Let's go in chronological order. There's been a disaster that's been slow brewing for the past few months, and that is European Commission rules by directives. They write directives, and everybody has to implement them. And so they have this corporate sustainability due diligence directive, CSDDD. And they impose it on all the major corporations doing business in or with the European Union. And so they started, they started cultivating Qatar as one of their main or the main supplier of non-Russian fossil fuel energy, natural gas primarily. And so, they're happy to have free and democratic natural gas, as opposed to the contemptible, odious Russian dictatorial natural gas. And so they cultivated Qatar as a supplier, but then they started imposing this CSDDD, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which imposed the obligation on the Qataris to investigate issues related to human rights and the environment, and to then they have to report, and then they have to mitigate the issues that they find, and so on. And so the Qataris thought, this is a whole bunch of nonsense. We're not going to do that. And so they, in May, the I think Minister of Energy of Qatar wrote a letter to the commissioners in Europe and said, look, if you insist on this thing, then we're just not going to supply you. We're going to, sell our natural gas elsewhere. And the Europeans backed down really fast, but they didn't give up on their directive because they still want to harass everybody else with it. But they thought making waivers for the Qataris, like, okay, so you don't have to really do it for the first 2 years. And then, it's in Croatian we say when you want to fart and hold it in all at the same time. Excuse the vulgar expression, but that's, I guess in English it would be having your cake and eating it too. So that's what the Europeans are doing. And in the process, they show themselves to be in a really poor negotiating position because they're imposing something really tough and they feel that they're in a position to do it. And then when the tiny little Qatar says, no, we're not doing it, they back down straight away and they start making waivers and exceptions. Okay, so that's one disaster. The second disaster was their dealings with China. So in the beginning of July, so about a month ago, the European Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, she held a meeting with Wang Yi, her Chinese counterpart. So it was the Chinese foreign ministry delegation and the European foreign ministry delegation. They held a meeting, and Kaja Kallas thought that she'd take advantage of the occasion to lecture the Chinese about European values and liberal democracy and blah blah blah. And she also decided to demand that the Chinese stop supporting Russia and Ukraine, and on and on. And Wang Yi was not having it, so he said, "Hey, we're not supporting Russia in the Ukrainian war, and we have no intention of getting involved there." But anyway, they basically managed to anger the Chinese. And apparently people on Chinese delegations said that they've never seen Wang Yi that angry ever before. So, a big blunder in a strategically very important relationship. And then at the end of the month, it was the turn of the presidents to meet. So President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, with Xi Jinping and their respective delegation, they met in Beijing. It was the 25th. So that was on the 24th of August, and July, 24th of July, and they were supposed to. It was supposed to be a celebration of 50 years of diplomatic relations between China and the European Union. Right, so it was supposed to be like a nice thing, affirm the importance of the relationship and blah blah blah. And again, Ursula von der Leyen decides to start lecturing the Chinese about human rights, democracy, demanding that China cease supporting the Russians. And she also said that right now, the China's support of Russia and Ukraine is now the most important factor determining our bilateral relation, meaning, you carry that on and we're not going to be nice to you anymore, or, something like that. And so this summit was, I think it was supposed to go on for 3 days, but after Ursula von der Leyen's lecture to Xi Jinping, the Chinese requested that the summit be cut short, and so it was just 1 day, and then they sent the Europeans off on a bus, without any, props and seeing them off nicely in limos and any of that. And so that was a very massive, humiliating snub by the Chinese to the Europeans. And when I say Europeans, we have to keep always in mind it's European Union, not necessarily any individual European country. And then the third and last one was the meeting in Scotland with Donald Trump, where he summoned Ursula von der Leyen to his private golf course resort, rather than visiting her in Brussels, as protocol would demand. And so she turned up, and somehow, I don't know exactly how Trump pulled it off, but somehow Trump pressured Ursula von der Leyen into accepting a deal that can only be termed humiliating, where before that meeting, the Europeans were assuming, because they're overconfident, they think that they're a lot more important than they really are. We're a big market, 450 million consumers, advanced countries, sophisticated Europeans, we're great. We're just a gift to the world. And so they assumed that they would be able to impose on the United States a deal of 0 for 0 tariffs, so that the Europeans would accept American goods with 0 tariffs, but the United States would have to reciprocate with 0 tariffs for imports into the United States. Instead, they got 0 for 15, so meaning US goods get into the European Union at 0% tariffs, European goods are have a 15% tariff imposed, and $750 billion in energy imports, and $600 billion of direct investments by the EU into the United States, and an undisclosed but massive amount of weapons that the Europeans would commit to buying from the United States. So basically, like a gangster-style shakedown, and Ursula von der Leyen agreed to it all. And so whether this is a really, really bad deal or not is up for a discussion, because there's no, it's not definite that any of this would be implemented, or at least it's certain that not all of it will be implemented. But it has stripped the EU naked to show it to the whole world that it's not even a paper tiger. It's a paper sheep. And the whole point of European countries coming together into a larger union was, among other things, to have greater security and to have greater negotiating power in these trade deals with other, with nations like China, Japan, United States, and other blocs. And so Ursula von der Leyen, in that one fell swoop, showed it all to be fake and worthless. And then you had opposition in one country after another coming out and say, this is a disaster. There's no way we can accept these deals. And I think that Trump fully well knows that nobody can accept these deals. But I think that the whole point was to show the EU for what it is, like a Soviet-style bureaucracy that has imposed itself on other European countries and is demanding obedience from them, even though they can do nothing positive for them. And so I think that it may be the beginning of the unraveling of the European Union, because one country after another is seeing that this is not worth the trouble. This is not giving us anything of what we thought we would have from the European Union. I think that every country individually would be able to negotiate a much, much better deal with the United States or anybody else. And so it's, in addition to having lost legitimacy, which it has done for a long time, the EU now has shown itself to be all downside and no upside.
Yeah, definitely agree with most of those thoughts, and some interesting things to ponder. I do want to talk about the global conflicts occurring right now. Namely, we'll start off with Israel-Palestine, and then I'd like to jump to Russia and Ukraine and get your thoughts on both. I've kind of reserved judgment for quite a long time on the Israel-Palestine conflict, because there's just so much conflicting information coming out of both sides, and no sources on social media seem to look at it in a gray way. They look at it as very black and white. Either you support Israel or you support Palestine, and that's it. And each side sees the other as evil. Obviously, Hamas is an extreme Islamic organization. I know that they commit a lot of atrocities. They're not good people. But it looks like we are seeing an attempt at a full-on ethnic cleansing in Gaza. At least that's how it appears to me at this point. One thing I want to note, it really does look like the October 7th massacre was allowed to happen, and that forces were told to stand down. I know there's some testimony from at least one IDF soldier who said he was told to not patrol during a certain time in the morning when it occurred. And I believe there was a long delay that was purposeful in deploying the IDF after Hamas attacked, of course, to then give justification for invading Gaza. That's at least what it looks like to me. I want to get your thoughts on the conflict as it currently stands and how Trump has been involved so far, because a lot of people have been accusing him of essentially being Netanyahu's dog, doing whatever Netanyahu tells him to do. He has pushed back here and there. Some are saying that's just for optical reasons, that behind the scenes he's still fully on board. There was the whole bombing of Iran. How do you see this whole picture and the American administration's involvement in it?
I'll start with with Hamas, because I have a much more nuanced view of what Hamas is, and I think that there's probably more than one Hamas. There's essentially probably two Hamases. One of them is the political organization in Gaza, and I think that political organization, their main purpose for existing, in addition to administrating the strip, is resistance to being enclosed in what's basically open air concentration camp. And I think in that sense, they are a legitimate political organization. Now, of course, there's also a part of Hamas that is linked in with Western intelligence agencies, and part of Hamas leadership enjoy high life in Qatar, and have been very closely involved with the British intelligence, probably with the CIA, and with the Mossad. And Qatar is a very important liaison between the MI6, the British foreign policy establishment, and the Middle Eastern regimes, including Hamas and including Israel and so on. And so, as we know, Qatar has been the main agent of funding Hamas. And so when October 7 happened, I knew it was a false flag straight away, because a friend of mine used to work in Israeli military intelligence, exactly on the border between Gaza and Israel. And this person told me with due explanations of why there is no way in the world that this could have happened by accident. And they told me all kinds of facts and data. They had people in Gaza. They knew pretty much everything about everything. The border was probably one of, if not the most secured borders in the whole world. And the fact that some Hamas fighters could just bust in at multiple points, get in, rampage for a few hours, and then return with a few hundred hostages is just impossible. And then immediately, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, I saw another 6 testimonials from Israeli soldiers or security officers who knew about that and who testified that this was absolutely a false flag attack. There was no way that it wasn't. And so I will assume that it was orchestrated between a very, very narrow circle of Israeli intelligence apparatus and this Qatar-centered arm of Hamas. And this, in a way, this was what was the point? Well, the point was obviously to begin the process of ethnic cleansing of Gaza. But I think that they also wanted to trigger a broader regional conflict, because the larger objective was to take down the Syrian regime and the Iranian regime. And so they wanted to start something truly horrendous to provoke the reaction of the Syrians, of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and of the Iranians, which are supportive of which were supportive of both Bashar al-Assad's regime in Damascus and of Hamas of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And some of these leaders of Hamas, the ones that lived the high life in Doha, were actually making very inflammatory statements at that point in time. They were actually calling for a global jihad against the West, basically. And I think one of them was Khalid Messal, who gave a statement, who was explicitly calling on Muslims all over the world to basically perpetrate terror in Western cities and countries and so forth. So I thought, that's very weird. That's not normal. This is not Islamic to begin with, because Islam the Quran explicitly forbids harming civilian populations and non-combatants, which is, people in the West don't appreciate that, because Islam has been demonized pretty much 24/7 since for over 20 years now. But this is, for example, the reason why Iran has a fatwa against nuclear weapons, because with nuclear weapons, there's no way you can avoid killing a large number of innocent civilians wherever you drop it. Anyway, so the whole thing didn't smell right to me, and I think it was a false flag attack orchestrated together between Israeli intelligence. Probably the choreography, the plan comes from MI6, from the British Foreign Office, foreign policy establishment, but the perpetrators were Hamas and Mossad, my guess. And so the fact that this was a false flag attack changes everything. It's not a it's not a war. It's not a struggle to free hostages. It's not a struggle to secure Israel. It's a premeditated crime. A premeditated crime which they knew they wanted to perpetrate for a very, very long time. And, if we got into the reasons why, it would take us forever. But basically, it's, I think, the ulterior motive for the Western interest. And I'll explain why I'm not putting Trump into this whole mix. But my list of the top of my list of suspects would be the City of London, is because they see their hegemony over the Middle East and Eurasia in general slipping away from them, and so they need to create a new crisis to reshape, that whole security or insecurity architecture that they established in the Middle East, the British and the French, in 1916 with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where they arbitrarily drew boundaries of nations that didn't exist before. They created artificial nations so that they could dominate them and in turn dominate the whole region. That was all kind of coming apart, and so they needed to reassert their hegemony, and they needed a new big crisis. Okay, anyway, your part of your question was, where's Trump in all this? And I see that in the social media and on the internet and in the mainstream media, Trump is getting a lot of bad press over this, because they see him as Benjamin Netanyahu's lapdog. And then, people show pictures of him holding, pulling up the chair for Benjamin Netanyahu, and they show him at the Wailing Wall with his hands there. And they say, like, look, you see, he's just a lapdog of the Israelis. Sorry, mosquito.
Okay.
But I don't think that's a fact at all. I don't think that Trump is Benjamin Netanyahu's lapdog. I think that Trump has a problem that he has a very significant and powerful voting bloc among the Jewish Zionists and Christian evangelicals in the United States. And these people are so fanatically devoted to Israel that, well, as far as the Christian evangelicals are concerned, that if the US president is perceived as not supporting Israel, he could be labeled as Antichrist. Okay, that's how serious it is. So one thing you never want to do is show any ambivalence towards Israel. And it's not just the United States, in the West in general, it's like that. I don't understand the psychosis, but it is like that. And remember, when they wanted to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, they labeled him anti-Semite because he kind of had an even-handed approach between the Palestinians and Israelis. You can't do that in Western politics. You have to be completely and totally supportive of Israel, no ifs and buts. Otherwise, you're committing political suicide. And I think that Trump and his cabinet are all fully well aware of that. So they all came out and said, like, Israel is number one. We love Israel. We will do everything for Israel. We will sacrifice our children to Israel. I'm exaggerating, but, basically it's like that. I don't think that's their real position. I think this is the political theater because you have to do this. I've mentioned, maybe even on your podcast, that in Israel is actually, in terms of geopolitical strategy, the interests of Israel and the interests of the United States are very, very incompatible, and it's a huge problem. And in 2012, Henry Kissinger, who knows something about the politics of that part of the world, he said that 10 years from now there will be no more Israel. And so he thought in 10 years that would be 2022. Okay, he got the time interval wrong. But I think that in the United States, among at least the sane segment of the political class, there's a keen awareness that there is no future for Israel. And in 2012, that same year, the U.S., let's call them intelligence community, they commissioned a study of the future of the Middle East in Israel. The title of the study, I'm sorry, I have to look it up.
Yeah, no problem.
Because I don't know it off the top of my head. So it was published in August 2012, and the title was U.S. Preparing for a Post-Israel Middle East. And it's an 82-page analysis report by all 16 or 17 intelligence agencies in the United States. And they reached the conclusion that Israel is a massive liability for the U.S. interests in that region, and that it's a massive problem that the United States has to figure out how to extricate itself from. And so I would encourage everybody to look up that report and to at least scan through its conclusions, because they're absolutely scathing. And this whole notion that the United States is absolutely and uniformly devoted to Israel above everything else is simply a myth. It's just not true. And I think that as far as Donald Trump is concerned, he is trying to extricate the United States from that alliance. Of course, he can't do it directly. He can't, kick out Benjamin Netanyahu from the White House. He cannot openly say, oh, let's have an even-handed policy between Israelis and the Palestinians, or Israelis and the Iranians. He has to play along with the political theater. But what we have seen now on the ground is that when he launched the attacks on Iran, he did it reluctantly. And when he was coerced into launching that attack, they actually coordinated the attack with the Iranians. And before the attacks ever happened, I said in a number of podcasts, I said, this is so incredibly, spectacularly idiotic that I think either there will be no attack at all, or there will be a prearranged, orchestrated attack where, the Americans are going to tell the Iranians, very sorry, we're going to have to drop some bombs. We'll give you pre-advice so you can, remove all your valuables out of the way. And I said that we would know for sure by the Iranian response, because if the Iranians responded in kind, meaning a telegraphed, prearranged retaliation that actually achieved close to nothing, then we would know that this was, this was a fight like World Wrestling Federation's fights are fights, right? Like a fake show of violence. And this is exactly what happened. So, the Americans dropped a couple of bombs, then the Iranians responded in kind. Donald Trump publicly thanked them for giving them pre-advice and telling them what they're going to drop where, so that there were zero casualties. And then Trump made a couple of statements that were very significant. One of them was that he was not looking for a regime change in Iran. And the whole Western, the Iran's nuclear program was a justification for the bombing. It was a pretext. It wasn't the real reason. The real reason was regime change. Trump said, I'm not interested in the regime change. And then he immediately wanted to engage with the Iranian leadership on deals because, the Iranians need nuclear power. They need security. They need to trade. They need the sanctions lifted. They need to develop their oil and gas sector and so forth. And Trump, of course, is keen to get in on that business. And so he gave the Israelis and the British and, this whole Western globalist cabal, he gave them a fake war. And then he said, all right, that's done. We obliterated the nuclear program. It's no more. It's just gone. It'll never be back again for a very long time. And so now we can talk business. Well, everybody knows that that's not true. But by insisting that the nuclear program was obliterated, and he was not accepting any other term practically, Trump removed the justification for any further military action against Iran. So, if you take all these little data points, ignore the rhetoric, ignore the pulling chair, ignore Trump paying his respects at the Wailing Wall, and just look at what he's actually doing, you see that he's not on board with the globalist Middle East strategy, which is, completely centered on Israel being the beachhead in charge of destabilizing the whole region. Israel is, colonial settler project. It was created by the British Empire. It was not created in 1948. It was planned. I mean, Israel came into existence in 1948, but the state of Israel had been planned since the late 19th century. And the Balfour Declaration was written in 1917, right? And so all of that goes back to London, to the geopolitics strategists who are still in the city of London. Trump is kind of a hostage to this geopolitical heritage, but I think that he wants to be free of it. only he can't be free of it by declaring we're no longer going to support Israel, because that would be political suicide. And okay, as a matter of internal politics in the United States, it is extremely important for Trump's mission, for what he's trying to achieve, to win midterms in 2026. So that is extremely important. And this is why, he needs those Jewish Zionists on board. He needs those Christian evangelicals. He needs these horrible characters like Lindsey Graham, for as long as they hold significant control of the Senate and so forth. So it's a lot of it is a political game. It doesn't mean that he likes Lindsey Graham. It doesn't mean that he likes Benjamin Netanyahu. This is just these are just facets of the reality that he's facing. And we, 6 months in power, we can't expect that, Trump could just walk in there and then change everything from one day to the next, because there are political constituencies that you have to appease. You can't antagonize them, and then you drive the course as best you can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with the Christian evangelical angle and how much those votes are needed. It almost feels like that's why Ted Cruz said when he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, he literally put it so simply. In my Sunday school, I read the Bible and it told me that we must defend Israel. And so it's just like the dumbest thing I've ever heard somebody say. But when you take it from the perspective of that's how this evangelical Christian constituency is thinking, then it's almost like a message directly to them in a way, that, hey, we support Israel. Don't worry, vote for us next time as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to shift to the war in Ukraine and how that continues to escalate. Russia continuing to advance and capture territory to the point where I've even seen some pro-Ukraine YouTube channels that are normally constantly claiming Russia's getting obliterated, their troops are demoralized, are now actually starting to say, things are actually getting a little bit serious on the Ukrainian side here. We've obviously seen those protests that have erupted against the Zelensky regime. Now, Trump's role in this, too, is interesting because it appears that he's been flip-flopping between the two sides on and on. First, he's talked to Putin. We had a great conversation. Then he gets sidelined by some meeting with Zelensky at the Vatican or whatever. He's constantly insulting one side or the other. And now the latest is he's going to put big sanctions on Russia if they don't hurry up and come to the negotiating table and stop the war. Initially, he said it's going to be a 50-day window, and then he said now it's 10 days. We're reducing it. What is going on there? What do you make of this whole situation? And do you think we could eventually see direct involvement in the form of boots on the ground from NATO? I spoke to Martin Armstrong recently. He said sources close to him told him NATO is planning a 250,000 troop deployment into Ukraine potentially. Wondering if you think that's a possibility and just your overall assessment of how that conflict is evolving.
Well, NATO may be planning things like this, but NATO has been planning all kinds of things that were never implemented. So, making plans is one thing. Implementing plans and deploying troops and weapons, that's a different thing altogether. And when it comes to that, the planners might say like, okay, everybody, let's go to war. And then a lot of people are going to say, why? Excuse me, what are we, what is the objective? What's the mission? What's the, what are we hoping to win by this? What are the risks on the downside? Are we ready? And how do we get out of this if it doesn't work out? And then the planners aren't, going to have no answers or no satisfactory answers. And, if you throw a party and nobody turns up, it's not much of a party at all, right? And so, NATO, by virtue of the organization that it is, has attracted a lot of these, let's call it pro-war fanatics, who are also sensing that NATO is becoming irrelevant, is becoming extremely costly, and it has no future unless they could invent a war that could preoccupy everybody as their central concern, and then everybody would have to pay protection racket to NATO because European countries have made themselves weak and almost defenseless, and so they need uh, they need a bigger organization, and then that bigger organization hopefully will not be abandoned by its daddy. And so that's European and NATO internal politics that I wouldn't take too seriously. One thing that I would take seriously would be a false flag attack, because if you could orchestrate a false flag attack and credibly blame it on Russia, then you could maybe galvanize the public opinion. Like you create a very, very powerful emotional moment. You've already prepared the media program, the communications program, and then you create again what we learned is called mass formation psychosis, and then you start pushing everybody to acquiesce, to consent to going to war against Russia because people feel scared and disoriented. And so that risk I would take seriously. These, premeditated plans, or we're going to all come together and beat up on Russia, I don't think that's realistic. And I think that it reflects a panic in NATO that they're becoming irrelevant and that the whole organization has no future. With regards to Trump, he deserves due credit for picking up the phone and calling up Vladimir Putin. And as we now know, they have spoken many times over the last 6 months. I think, my count, at least 7 times. They're having long and substantive conversations, and it's not just about Ukraine. It's about the future of the world and the global security architecture. And he has sidestepped the U.S. role in Ukraine, because remember, what the Ukrainians and the British and the French wanted from the United States is to provide a security guarantee to Volodymyr Zelensky's government, not necessarily to Ukraine per se, to a Western-aligned government in Kiev. That's the key. And so, Zelensky already started in October of 2024. So before Trump was even elected president, or maybe September 2024, he started trying to seduce Trump with the promise of $500 billion in rare earths deal in Ukraine. All of that was basically a British orchestrated 3-card Monty, because they thought, Trump is a greedy businessman. Here's how we're going to, maneuver him to our side. It didn't work. Trump saw through it. It was really like a cheap hustle that went on into February, March of this year, and it didn't work out. And Trump basically said, no, we will not give Ukraine a security guarantee. The reason why this was key, this providing security guarantee, because it would have committed the United States to enter the war against Russia on the side of the West in case NATO troops in Ukraine came under Russian fire. So the French and the British, they wanted to bring these peacekeepers, which they then relabeled as reassurance troops or assurance troops, a small number of troops, not even a significant fighting force, but they wanted them to come under fire from the Russians. And then they would say like, look, the Russians have attacked us. Now you have to defend us. And then, the United States, with its own blood, treasure, and armaments, would have to come into Ukraine and fight alongside with the Ukrainians, with the British, with the French, the Poles, the Romanians, the Moldovans, everybody all together, and then try to push Russia back out of Ukraine. So that was the idea, that was the hope. And Trump said, nope, we're not going to be doing that. And so then, you had all these emergency summits in Paris, in London, where, all these European leaders were going, oh my God, what are we going to do now? The United States is no longer on board. And so they, they thought up all these little, how do you call them, schemes about prolonging the war, whichever way possible, and continuing to call on Trump to stay on board. But it's not working. And I think that now they're so desperate that whatever Trump throws at them, they will accept. And so Trump saw the opportunity to take advantage of the Europeans for the trade deals, for the rearmament deal, for selling them, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. weapons. And so, if you're going to do that, and then, keeping them dependent, keeping them hoping that daddy will come back to them. And so where you see him flip-flopping, he's not really flip-flopping. He's just keeping them on the hook. Because if he went there and said, like, no, you're not getting anything from us anymore, no weapons, no intelligence support, nothing, then the Europeans would have to turn inward and start developing their own war-making technologies, weapons, logistics, intelligence, satellites, all of these things. Rather than them doing that, Trump wants them on the hook. They want them spending money on U.S. armaments, but he has no intention of going to war against the Russians. So I think that the Europeans are now so desperate that they will spend any amount of money on to keep daddy on board. They will do everything he asks of them in the hopes that after the 2028 elections, maybe some new Joe Biden or Barack Obama are going to be in power, and then all of this money, all of this investment will become golden again. And so I think that Trump is simply stringing them along. I don't think he has any intention of going to war with Russia. And all this war of words, between him and Medvedev, and then him sending 2 nuclear submarines somewhere. They didn't say where exactly. He just moved them somewhere. And everybody lost their minds. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. If Trump actually had any intention of deploying nuclear submarines for military purposes rather than PR purposes, he wouldn't have said anything about anything. He would have just ordered them there to wait for their orders, rather than announcing, like, oh, look, we're being tough. This is kind of the same war of words that we already saw between Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea during his first term. And so at the very same time, while he was calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man and saying my rockets are bigger than his rockets, and everybody it came to a point where everybody thought, like, oh shit, we're going to be going to war against North Korea. At the very same time, he has sent a delegation of U.S. representatives and people from Pentagon to China and to South Korea to prepare for the peace talks. And his hope was to conclude a peace between North and South Korea, not just the United States and North Korea. And we saw that in the immediate aftermath of his meetings with Kim Jong-un, the two Koreas started demining the demilitarized zone between the two countries. And so we now know, as a fact, because Marco Rubio let the cat out of the bag, that there have been secret negotiations between the Americans and the Russians, which I was saying that very probably are going on anyway. And the statement for public consumption is that they're trying to coerce Russia into an unconditional ceasefire. I don't think that's I don't think they're trying to do that anyway, because the Russians have made it more than clear that this is completely out of the question. So what's the point of continuing to insist on that? They're discussing other things. And the most important things that they're discussing, they're not telling us. That's 100% is being discussed behind closed doors, not for public consumption. But in that, I think that's good. That's the good news.
Well, Alex, this has been a fantastic conversation as always. Tell us about iSystem Trend Following, Trend Compass, and anywhere else you'd like to direct people online who want to hear more from you and check out your work.
So the easiest way to find me, I have two publications on Substack. The first one is the daily trend following market newsletter called iSystem Trend Compass, covering about 18 global financial and commodity markets, including gold and Bitcoin. And the other one is my personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack, where I don't publish daily, but my articles there are a bit more, let's call it, more researched and more refined. And then I'm also quite active on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie. And from there, people can link to my website called also iSystem Trend Following to learn more about the market services that we deliver.
Great. I'll put links to all of that in the description below. Thank you once again for coming on, Alex. It's always a blast.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for having me, and warm greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you for joining us today. Take advantage of sponsor ARC Silver Gold Osmium specials. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, only $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs 2025 1-ounce coins, just $2.87 over spot. Well supplies last. Reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And be sure to pick up your Commodity Culture merchandise using the link in the description below. Everything is backed by a 100% quality guarantee, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.